Chinese smartphone maker Huawei has been blocked from entering the U.S. market after a partnership with AT&T broke down. What do Chinese companies need to prove to penetrate the U.S. market? Some ask.
In this episode of Travelogue, I explore Xiamen's hippest hangouts with my local co-host. Together, we'll discover how this traditional yet cosmopolitan city continues to successfully reinvent itself.
Yes, this is World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday, live on CGTN. China's Commerce Ministry has voiced its concern with America's protectionist policies. The statement was in response to a pair of Chinese companies failing to see agreements with their American partners. The ministry said it hoped the U.S. could create a more positive business environment for foreign investment. Here are the details.
Chinese tech giant Huawei faces another major setback in expanding its U.S. smartphone market. A letter from the U.S. Senate and House Intelligence Committees to the Federal Communications Commission shows that lawmakers are concerned about Chinese companies in the U.S. telecom sector. The lawmakers were especially concerned with the Huawei AT&T partnership to launch consumer products in the U.S. Huawei said that the U.S. market presents unique challenges and that it remains committed to expanding there. Meanwhile, the U.S. has blocked the $1.2 billion sale of money transfer service MoneyGram to Ant Financial, an affiliate of Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba. The deal was nixed by the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. for national security concerns. Commerce Ministry spokesman Gao Fang said that it's a shame to see a Chinese enterprises standard business investment hindered due to so-called national security issues.
We don't oppose Washington's normal security investigations into foreign investment, but we are concerned about the tendency that the U.S. uses national security as an excuse to set obstacles to foreign investment.
The experience of China's tech companies blocked from entering the American market is seen as a wider trend of U.S. protectionism, which is opposed by the international community, including China. Could Washington's appetite for strict regulation serve as opening moves in a trade war? Trump is expected to stick to his America First motto when he addresses the Davos Forum later this month. In contrast, Beijing remains steadfast in pursuing win-win results through China-U.S. cooperation and hopes the two countries will work to create a positive business environment.
For more on China-U.S. trade tensions, well, shall we say tensions or not? We are joined in our Beijing studio, Zhang Jianping, Director General of the Center for Regional Cooperation with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation. Welcome, sir. Also joining us in Beijing, Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics with the University of International Business and Economics here in China. In New York, we are joined by Max Wolf, Chief Economist from the Phoenix Group. I want to start with you, Mr. Wolf. Of course, it's not the first time, not the second time, not even the third time that Chinese companies looking at merger and acquisition with American companies. There's likely to be a problem inside the United States. So the thing is, it is still continuing even today. That is the problem, Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, look, clearly the United States has historically been a champion of free trade. Very disturbingly and problematically, I think we've moved away from that, particularly aggressively with the new administration. And certainly, particularly in my mind, the MoneyGram deal, the national security story around that seems a little bit thin. In terms of Huawei and communications, there are some real concerns when you talk about national communications in any country, but the United States seeks to do business, and we are very active in our tech and communications business around the world, including in China, and we need to open up to others as much as we need and want to be open when we show up trying to do business in other people's homes.
Let's take a look at some numbers just to see what exactly the situation is. China's tech M&A, which is merger and acquisitions, are hitting barriers in the United States, some say. leading to an 87% drop in the investment volume from 2016 to 2017. A report says the total revenues for Chinese mergers and buyouts in the U.S. plunged from $15 billion in 2016 to less than $2 billion in 2017. On the other hand, the 40% of China's exports to the U.S. are generated by American companies operating in China. Those companies have been allowed to set up shop in China under joint venture agreements that require technology transfers from the U.S. parent company. The U.S. is now putting those activities on hold. Okay, those are the numbers, but here's one thing we have to clear up first, Professor Liu, that is, now these days, China also have its foreign exchange control, which means you cannot move too much of your money overseas, including buying and investing in the United States. Of course, that is as a result of China trying to create a fair environment, both internally and internationally, not to have foreign exchange flight, rather. But having said that, though, does the number that I read to you earlier still ring a bell?
Well, absolutely, yes. China is not really putting a ban on outbound investment. It's just there to streamline the direction. It's not there to buy sports teams, to buy real estate, but they still encourage companies to acquire the technology-intensive companies and also to buy strategic assets. Right. So that's, of course, yeah, that's one reason that both policymakers and business leaders are getting really rationalized in decision-making for overseas investment. And on the other, say, the plummeting of this number for merger and acquisition in the United States is really out of the fear and out of the real obstacle presented from the national security review. And now the Huawei case is even more absurd because it doesn't even go for institutionalized review, but simply exercising pressure from those lawmakers onto the FCC and also on the company. So while the U.S. has been pointing fingers to China, so the government is intervening into business decisions. Now what are they doing? So this is really quite a shame, I should say.
Mr. Zhang, trade disputes, it's not rare. In China and the United States, it's already part of the game. But of course, we wish this proportion of the game could be smaller, right? So that the business could flourish. And that is not yet the reality. People say Huawei could be a barometer, because Huawei has been a sensitive name, so-called, to the United States. There were so-called description of it having, army background, having Chinese government relations, but actually all of those are not true, as Huawei has been stating many times. So it is being used as a barometer, or as whether it's cloudy or shiny when it comes to U.S.-China trade relations. So what does this case really tell us about the current atmosphere?
Yeah. You know that given that the U.S. is suffering from trade deficit against China, and then when China's investments go to United States, that will make new balance. So that's good thing for the U.S. But I very regret to see Huawei in the past 10 years, in many cases, failed in the U.S. Didn't allow invest in the U.S., including semiconductor, companies, .com companies, 3Ds, something like that. But if you look at Huawei's investment in other countries, for example, in the UK and in so lot of countries in the world, no problems. So I'm afraid that in the U.S., CFIUS, they have their special concerns on telecommunication sectors and semiconductor sectors. Also, there are so lot of politicians in the U.S., congressmen, they have their pay attention on those sectors. But I don't think that any cases cannot get successful. That's a problem.
Right.
Yeah.
If a company does whatever and still could not be successful when it comes to seeking cooperation with business of another country. Here is some problem over there. Okay, so Professor Wolf, I have to say, we talk about this case not just because of Huawei, not because of just failure this time, but all of these things is happening with a much bigger background. What are the contents of this background? Technology development has become so fast these days. Tech companies like Huawei, like AT&T, are trying to make sure their maps are getting bigger and they're having the strongest competitive edges over the others. As a result of that, they would do merger and acquisitions or buyout. Secondly, China and the United States trade relations seem to have entered a new age, as they say, with China becoming more competitive and China-US trying to seek its own status, particularly toward one another. Thirdly, we see this big background of so-called China's trade surplus over the United States. Both sides have been working very hard in order to seek solutions to solve it. So Huawei's case happened with all of these as the background. It makes people think much further than just this specific case. Mr. Wolf.
Yeah, that would certainly be understandable. Look, we have a pattern of decreasing openness to global trade in the U.S., and we have that happening at the same time. The United States has become more aggressive in making accusations of lack of openness against others. And so we sort of spoil the goodwill with our accusations and then further undermine it if we block certain activities. Let's keep in mind also that American consumers have benefited very greatly from the entry of Chinese products and would benefit further from the entry of world-class, competitively priced products from anywhere in the world, including China. So part of the issue for the U.S. in getting this policy right is we need global cooperation, and American consumers need the best products at the best prices, and American businesses need the best products at the best prices. And if we don't have the best products at the best prices, we're not going to fix our trade deficit, which we have with many countries over long periods of time. And there is something a little bit unfair and unbalanced about which countries we tend to make accusations against and which we don't, because we have structural trade imbalances with more than one country.
Professor Liu, there's the issue of so-called national security. So how big really is this issue? How should we understand this issue? Because they say, okay, besides Huawei, as some American politicians would say, you have a so-called background of the government, of the army, which both of which are not true. Yet you also have this so-called data issue. Once you have smartphones produced by China, China could get hold of the data because they think Huawei is working with the government to provide all the data that they have acquired in the phone and feed it back to the Chinese government. There is, though, the issue of security for consumers, for privacy, and also for national security. But the Apple phones are being sold in China, too. So how do you see these debates?
Well, I think this accusation, particularly the accusation for possible espionage, is really totally groundless and even absurd because, you know, yes, mobile phones are communication devices, but they are consumer products. They are not really, you know, the infrastructure for communication. That's number one. Number two is that it is totally competitive market. You have Samsung, you have from China, you even have ZTE, and Oppo is also on the agenda to break into the U.S. market. So it's like a washing machine, like you know, many other headsets. So as for consumer information, you know, it's totally open, and particularly the U.S. has a Free Information Act. So on the other side, when China was accusedly more protective, but we are open to, you know, Apple, to many other global brands in China. So this is really totally groundless. But I think, you know, they have a sort of myopia, I should say, in once they label someone or some institution, they always find trouble with them. So there was a subpoena issue, there was an accusation of a military man issue, but so far there's no evidence to show that you know, this is really landing on any ground. So this is really, I think, it's paranoid.
I guess there should be a campaign against this kind of fake news, right? Let's go to Mr. Zhang about this too. National security is a decent concern for any country. But the question is, how do you do it? You do it by closing the door. You do it by doing unfair trade practices with your other counterparts, or you do it in a smart way and in a way that's really going to guarantee the security of your citizens. There's a sea difference between these two.
Yes.
Mr. Zhang.
Actually, in the U.S., CFIUS is their institution for their, national security issues. But actually, they have, very powerful, this entity is very powerful, and they have right to make decisions. But I think that given the U.S. Wants to promote, more balanced economic relationship with Chinese side, we hope that we can promote mutual trust. Without trust, that means we will doubt you and you will doubt China. U.S. doubt China, China doubt U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, there's another dangerous aspect of this, Mr. Wolf. That is, Huawei as a Chinese company, together with many other Chinese companies, have American counterparts. They provide services, they provide certain kinds of technology, they provide certain kinds of devices that eventually would be used in the final products. So further harming of the feelings and the understanding of what the U.S. is about, how much will that really contribute to a should-be getting warmer cooperation business environment between Chinese companies and American companies? After all, holding hand in hand doing business, that's going to make bigger money, right? As far as I understand.
Yeah, look, both countries have prospered enormously and become wealthy and powerful working together and trading together. And there is no doubt, by the way, that we would be both poorer and weaker if we could not work together. So that's unambiguous. But I do think that the American public and the American business community needs to take much more seriously changes in rhetoric, and some unfortunate decisions will have reverberations and effects, not just in China, but all over the world. After all, China is a very wealthy, very powerful country. The world watches America's relationships, including the relationships with China, and if we don't treat one country right, there's no reason for other countries to believe they won't be next.
All right. Before we go, Professor Liu, I have to say this. Let's just be pragmatic. All the habits die hard, right? We all understand that. So Huawei has been accused once and again and again and again. So what can they do? What can other Chinese companies do? And what can, be the right attitude when we come to business?
Well, the continued presence and the expanded presence of the China made, particularly at the high end, is inevitable and unstoppable in the United States. So after all, the United States cannot really insulate itself from interacting with the whole world in terms of the economic cooperation and also in terms of the consumer buying. So therefore, from the Chinese side, I think, instead of simply complaining, protesting, we do the right work. So now, yes, the AT&T is not allowed to carry. So you can still sell it in the open market as long as your quality of their consumers really have the final vote with their dollar in hand. So that's one. The other is really to fund more of those, the local collaborators to have better communication and negotiation with the different stakeholders. It's not only the government agencies.
Right. We hope those will happen, as you say. Thank you so much, Zhang Jianping, and also Mike Wolf, Liu Baocheng. Thank you. Really, thank you for being with us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us. Scroll inside CGTN into your search engine. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. A great weekend, everyone.